Commander Vexrel stood before the massive holographic display in his private quarters aboard the battlecruiser Eternal Dawn, and watched the data streams flow past his eyes like rivers of light. He had been reviewing human military files for the past 6 hours, and the more he read, the more his twin hearts beat with something he rarely felt anymore. Fear. Real fear. The kind that makes even a seasoned warrior question his choices. The Corvian Empire had maintained detailed intelligence on humanity since first contact 15 years ago. Every major power in the Galactic Coalition kept similar records. They had to. Earth was different from any species they had encountered before, dangerous in ways that defied conventional military analysis. The humans didn't just fight wars, they perfected them. They turned warfare into an art form that other species could barely comprehend. Vexrel pulled up the file on Captain Jake Morrison and read through the battle reports from Proxima Station. The engagement had occurred 2 years ago, when a Zeltari invasion fleet attempted to claim the mining colony orbiting Proxima Centauri. The humans had only 3,000 Marines stationed there. The Zeltari brought 9,000 shock troops supported by orbital bombardment platforms. Every tactical computer in the galaxy would have calculated an easy Zeltari victory. Every simulation would have predicted human surrender within 48 hours. The computers were wrong. The simulations were useless. Morrison had turned the entire colony into a fortress. His Marines used the mining tunnels to move unseen between defensive positions. They collapsed entire sections of the facility to funnel enemy troops into kill zones. They rigged mining equipment to explode when Zeltari units passed nearby. They fought for 72 hours straight without rest and without retreat. When reinforcements finally arrived, Morrison's force had lost 800 Marines, but they had destroyed the entire Zeltari ground force. 6,000 enemy soldiers dead. The remaining 3,000 surrendered rather than face more human defenders. The report included testimony from captured Zeltari officers. One commander described how human soldiers would continue fighting even after sustaining injuries that should have been fatal. Another spoke of defensive positions that appeared overnight in locations that had been empty just hours before. A third officer refused to speak at all. He just stared at the walls and whispered the same phrase over and over. The humans don't stop. They never stop. Vexrel closed that file and opened another. Lieutenant Nicole Brady commanded a destroyer squadron that became legendary after what the Coalition now called the Titan Moon Incident. Corvian raiders had attempted to establish a forward base on Saturn's largest moon. Earth considered the entire Sol system to be sovereign territory. Brady's squadron engaged the Corvian forces immediately. The aliens had superior ships with better weapons and stronger shields. They had numerical advantage. They had every tactical benefit. They lasted 47 hours before retreating. The battle reports made Vexrel's skin crawl. Brady's crews fought with the intensity that bordered on insanity. When ships ran out of missiles, they used railguns. When railguns overheated, they used point defense lasers at ranges those weapons were never designed for. One destroyer lost main power and continued fighting on backup systems. Another had its bridge destroyed and kept fighting with engineering directing the battle. When the destroyer Valiant lost all weapons capability, its captain rammed the ship directly into a Corvian cruiser at full speed. Both vessels were destroyed, but the explosion took out 2 more enemy ships caught in the blast radius. The Corvian fleet withdrew after losing 11 ships to Brady's 5. The admiral in command filed a report stating that continuing the engagement would have resulted in total fleet loss, even though the humans were clearly losing the battle. He wrote that human crews don't calculate odds of survival. They don't surrender when defeat is certain. They fight until their ships are debris or until every enemy vessel is destroyed. There is no middle ground. There is no negotiation. There is only violence delivered with absolute commitment. Every species in the Galactic Coalition studied these reports. War colleges on a dozen worlds taught courses on human military doctrine. The lessons were always the same. Humans coordinate their forces with frightening efficiency. They combine ground troops, aircraft, naval vessels, and orbital assets into seamless operations that overwhelm enemy defenses. They adapt to battlefield conditions faster than any other species. They turn disadvantages into advantages through creativity and sheer bloody-minded determination. They understand something called total war, where every resource and every citizen can be mobilized for the war effort. They don't just fight to win battles. They fight to completely destroy their enemy's ability to make war. Vexrel had memorized these lessons. He had trained his crews according to coalition doctrine for engaging human forces. He had spent years preparing for the possibility of combat against Earth's military. He knew what to expect. He knew how dangerous they were. He knew all of this and still felt confident in his empire's upcoming offensive. The Corvians would bring overwhelming force. They would strike multiple targets simultaneously. They would not give the humans time to coordinate their defenses or mobilize their total war capability. It would be brutal, but it would be decisive. Then Vexrel noticed something in the intelligence files. Gaps. Small inconsistencies in the data. Reports of military operations that didn't quite make sense. An enemy weapons facility destroyed on the far side of Zeltari space, with no record of which human unit was responsible. A Thorian intelligence center compromised with no evidence of how the breach occurred. A Corvian admiral assassinated in his own quarters aboard a flagship surrounded by an entire fleet. The security footage showed nothing. The guards saw nothing. One moment the admiral was alive. The next moment he was dead with a single precise wound to his primary heart. The coalition intelligence analyst had explanations for these incidents. Statistical anomalies, exaggerated reports, propaganda designed to make human capabilities seem more threatening than they actually were. Vexrel had accepted these explanations because the alternative was too disturbing to consider. But now, reviewing all the data in preparation for the offensive, he saw a pattern. Missions completed by forces that left no trace. Objectives achieved by units that didn't appear in any order of battle. Impossible operations carried out by soldiers who seemed to be ghosts. He ran a search query through the intelligence database looking for any classified human military units. The search returned nothing. He tried different parameters. Special operations, elite forces, covert action teams. The database returned general information about human military structure, but nothing specific. Nothing detailed. Nothing that explained the gaps in the data. Vexrel felt his twin hearts beat faster. The Empire was preparing to launch the largest offensive in Corvian history. 27 battle fleets, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. All of it aimed at humanity, and somewhere in the back of his mind a small voice whispered a terrifying question. What if the humans Earth showed to the galaxy wasn't everything they had? What if the conventional military forces that every species feared so much were just the visible part of something larger, something hidden, something far more dangerous? He dismissed the thought. The offensive would proceed as planned. The humans would be overwhelmed by superior numbers. The Corvian Empire would establish dominance over this entire sector of space. Everything would go according to plan. It had to. Because if there really was something more dangerous than Earth's regular military hiding in the shadows, then the galaxy had badly miscalculated the threat humanity posed. Vexrel turned off the holographic display and tried to sleep. He couldn't. He kept thinking about those gaps in the intelligence. Those impossible missions. Those ghosts who completed objectives that should have been impossible. Somewhere in the darkness of space, something was moving. Something the Coalition didn't know about. Something they were about to meet. Deep inside a mountain in Colorado, in a facility that existed on no official map and appeared in no government database, Colonel Dan Harper stood before his team and studied their faces. He had worked with these people for 7 years and trusted them more than he trusted his own instincts. They were the best operators Earth had ever produced. They were Ghost Unit 7. They were about to be sent into hell, and everyone in the room knew it. The briefing room was small and cold. Steel walls, concrete floor. No windows, no decorations. Just a holographic display showing star charts and enemy positions. Harper activated the display and watched the data materialize in the air between them. His team leaned forward. They knew that look on his face. They were going somewhere bad. Master Sergeant Lisa Kane sat closest to the display, and her eyes tracked every detail with the focus of a predator. She had grown up hunting deer in the Appalachian Mountains with her grandfather. By age 12, she could track an animal through forests that looked untouched to everyone else. By 15, she could shoot a squirrel at 300 meters with iron sights. She joined the Army at 18 because civilian life felt too small, too simple, too boring. She needed something more. The Army gave her that something. Advanced marksmanship courses, sniper training, counterinsurgency operations. By 25, she had completed every combat qualification the military offered. By 30, she had done things that would remain classified until long after she was dead. She could shoot the antenna off a surveillance drone from 2 kilometers away. She had done it twice. Once in heavy rain. Once in zero gravity aboard a space station. Both times the target never knew she was there until the shot was already gone. Technical Sergeant Paul Dixon sat next to Lisa and watched the display with the calm expression of someone who had seen everything twice. He handled demolitions and electronic warfare for the team. He could breach any security system ever built. He could disable defense grids that were supposed to be impossible to hack. He could make explosives from fertilizer and fuel. He could make them from cleaning supplies and medical equipment. He could probably make them from candy and shoe polish if he needed to. His official military record showed a quiet career as a communications specialist. 15 years of maintaining radio equipment and updating software. His real record was something else entirely. 3 enemy intelligence agencies had his face in their files. None of them knew his real name. 2 of them thought he was dead. One of them offered a reward for information leading to his capture. The reward had been active for 6 years. Nobody had collected it. Nobody would. Lieutenant Amy Foster reviewed the mission parameters on her datapad and made notes in the margins. She served as the team's medic and close-quarters combat specialist. She could keep someone alive with nothing but a field trauma kit and determination. She could perform emergency surgery in the back of a moving vehicle. She could also disarm and incapacitate an opponent twice her size in under 3 seconds. She was fluent in 7 Earth languages and 4 alien dialects. The Corvian dialect she had learned by listening to intercepted communications for 6 months straight. The Zeltari language she picked up during a mission, where she pretended to be a refugee for 3 weeks. She was very good at pretending to be things she was not. Chief Warrant Officer Ryan Cole stood at the back of the room with his arms crossed and his eyes on the star charts. He handled insertion and extraction for the team. He could pilot anything with engines, helicopters, jets, spacecraft, experimental vehicles that were still in testing phases. He had flown missions through electrical storms that grounded entire air forces. He had navigated asteroid fields that navigation computers said were impassable. During one classified operation, he flew a stealth transport through a binary star system, with 1 engine offline and half his instruments dead. He kept the ship together through skill and stubbornness until they reached the extraction point. The team called him steady. He called it refusing to die. Colonel Harper began the briefing. The Corvian Empire was preparing a major offensive against human colonies in the Outer Reach. Standard military intelligence predicted the attack would come in 6 months. Coast Unit 7 had better information. 3 weeks, maybe 4 at most. The Corvians were massing their fleet behind a massive nebula cloud called the Shroud. The radiation from the nebula masked their ship signatures. Conventional reconnaissance couldn't penetrate deep enough to get accurate counts. Earth's regular military knew something was happening, but they didn't know the scale or the timing. Ghost Unit 7 had a different mission. They would insert into Corvian space using a modified stealth ship. They would infiltrate a strategic command station orbiting a gas giant called Core Prime. The station coordinated 3 entire battle fleets. It housed over 10,000 Corvian military personnel. It had defense systems that could destroy a cruiser before it got within weapons range. The team would get inside that station. They would access the strategic planning computers. They would gather intelligence on fleet positions, attack vectors, and timing. Then they would get out. Harper didn't sugarcoat the danger. This was deep penetration into heavily defended enemy territory. No support available. No backup coming if things went wrong. No rescue missions if they were captured. The team would be on their own from the moment they crossed into Corvian space until they made it back to Earth. If they were captured, the government would deny any knowledge of their existence. If they were killed, their families would be told they died in training accidents. This was what special forces did. They went places regular military couldn't go. They did things regular military couldn't do. They accepted risks that would make most people refuse the mission. Nobody refused. Nobody even hesitated. Lisa Kane asked about the station's security protocols. Paul Dixon wanted to know about their computer systems and encryption methods. Amy Foster inquired about the Corvian personnel schedules and shift rotations. Ryan Cole studied the orbital mechanics and calculated approach vectors. They treated this like any other mission. Because for them, it was just another mission. This was what they trained for. This was why they existed. Staff Sergeant Kevin Brooks entered the briefing room and nodded to Colonel Harper. Brooks would pilot their stealth ship through the insertion. He was the best pilot in the Special Forces community, and possibly the best pilot Earth had ever produced. He had learned to fly cargo planes in Alaska, landing on ice runways in weather that killed regular pilots. When the military needed someone to test experimental stealth craft in combat conditions, he was the first to volunteer. He had crashed 7 times in hostile territory. He walked away from all 7 crashes. The team called him lucky. He insisted it was pure skill, and knowing exactly how much punishment a ship could take before it came apart. The briefing lasted 2 hours. Harper went through every detail of the mission. Entry vectors, station layout, security procedures, emergency extraction protocols, backup plans for the backup plans. When he finished, he asked if anyone had questions. Nobody did. They had done this kind of operation before. Not exactly like this. Never exactly like this. But similar enough that they knew what to expect. Pain, exhaustion, fear controlled and channeled into focus, the constant possibility of death, the absolute certainty that failure meant people back home would die instead. The team dispersed to prepare their gear. They had 48 hours before launch. Time to check equipment, time to review intelligence files, time to write letters that would only be delivered if they didn't come back. Special Forces operators always wrote those letters. Most of them wrote new ones before every mission. Just in case. Because they understood something that most people never had to face. Sometimes you don't come home. Sometimes the mission costs everything. Sometimes that's the only way to get the job done. Colonel Harper watched his team leave the briefing room and felt the familiar weight settle onto his shoulders. He had sent people on dangerous missions before. He had lost operators before. It never got easier. It never stopped hurting. But the mission was necessary. Earth needed this intelligence. The survival of millions of people depended on what Ghost Unit 7 could accomplish in the next few weeks. That was the math. That was always the math. Risk a few to save many. Send the best people into the worst situations and trust them to do the impossible. He looked at the star charts one more time. The Shroud Nebula glowed on the display like a wound in space, somewhere behind that radiation cloud. The Corvian Empire was preparing to strike at humanity. Somewhere in that darkness, his team would soon be operating alone against impossible odds. He had faith in them. He had seen them do impossible things before. But faith didn't stop the worry. Faith didn't make the risk disappear. It just made it bearable enough to give the orders and send good people into danger. The stealth ship cut through space like a knife through silk and made no sound in the void. Kevin Brooks sat in the pilot seat with his hands steady on the controls, and his eyes watching 3 different displays at once. They had been traveling for 11 days through the most dangerous region of Corvian space, and so far everything had gone perfectly. That worried him more than any malfunction would have. Perfect operations usually meant you missed something important. The Shroud Nebula filled the viewport ahead like a purple and green wall of light. Radiation poured from the cosmic cloud in waves that would fry most ship sensors within minutes. The Corvians used it as natural cover for their fleet staging area. Human reconnaissance ships couldn't get close enough to see what was hidden inside. But Ghost Unit 7 wasn't flying a reconnaissance ship. They were flying something much better. The stealth craft was a hybrid of captured alien technology and human engineering. No other ship like it existed. The hull absorbed sensor sweeps instead of reflecting them. The engines ran cold enough that thermal scanners couldn't detect them beyond a few thousand kilometers. The power systems generated almost no electromagnetic signature. On every scanner in the galaxy, the ship simply didn't exist. It was a ghost carrying ghosts into enemy territory. Brooks adjusted their approach vector to bring them in from below the orbital plane. Most species in the galaxy thought in terms of up and down even in space. They positioned their sensors and weapons to cover the most obvious approach angles. The area directly beneath a station's south pole was usually a blind spot. Not completely undefended, but less watched than other vectors. It was exactly the kind of tactical oversight that Special Forces operators trained to exploit. Lisa Kane worked at the sensor station and mapped the Corvian command station's defensive grid. The station was massive, 15 kilometers long and 5 kilometers wide at the center. It bristled with weapons emplacements and shield generators. Defensive satellites orbited in carefully calculated patterns. Fighter patrols ran continuous loops around the perimeter. The station wasn't just defended. It was a fortress designed to withstand a full fleet assault. Paul Dixon sat next to Lisa, and analyzed the station's power distribution. Every facility had weak points. Every system had vulnerabilities. The key was finding them before you needed them. He identified the main reactor signatures and traced power conduits through the station's superstructure. He found communication hubs and backup systems. He located the command center deep in the station's core. He built a mental map of everything that mattered. Where power flowed, where data transmitted, where explosions would hurt the most if they needed to hurt something. The insertion point was a maintenance docking bay on the station's lower hemisphere. Small craft used it for routine supply runs and repair operations. Security there would be lighter than the main docking facilities. Not light, just lighter. Enough of a difference that 6 highly trained operators might slip through if they were very good and very lucky. Colonel Harper reviewed the mission timeline one final time. They had a 4-hour window and shift changes would create small gaps in the security coverage. Not much. Maybe 30 seconds here, 45 seconds there. Enough time if everything went exactly right. He had been on enough missions to know things rarely went exactly right. That was why they trained. That was why they planned for every contingency. That was why they only sent the best people. The stealth ship approached the maintenance bay and Brooks brought them in so smoothly that the landing struts touched down without a sound. The bay was empty except for 2 small repair craft and some cargo containers. Perfect. They had maybe 10 minutes before someone noticed an unscheduled ship had docked. The team moved fast. Amy Foster and Lisa Kane went first, dressed in stolen Corvian maintenance uniforms. They looked wrong to human eyes, but aliens had trouble telling individual humans apart. The disguises would hold up to casual inspection. Maybe. Paul Dixon and Ryan Cole followed 30 seconds later, carrying equipment cases that supposedly contained repair tools. Colonel Harper and Kevin Brooks brought up the rear as supervisors overseeing the maintenance crew. It was a thin cover story, but thin was all they had. They crossed the docking bay and entered a service corridor. Corvian script covered the walls with directional signs and safety warnings. Amy had memorized the station layout during the flight. She led them through the maze of passages toward the central lift system. They passed 3 Corvian workers who barely glanced at them. The first test passed. The disguises held. The cargo elevator required security credentials. Paul Dixon produced a stolen access card that he had modified with data pulled from intercepted transmissions. He swiped the card and held his breath. The elevator doors opened. The second test passed. They stepped inside and began the long ride through 15 levels of the station toward the command center. The elevator stopped 4 times to allow other passengers on and off. Each time, the team stood quietly and tried to look like they belonged there. Each time, the other passengers ignored them. Corvian military culture was rigid and hierarchical. Workers didn't question supervisors. Lower ranks didn't speak to higher ranks without permission. The team used that cultural blind spot to hide in plain sight. On the 12th level, a Corvian security officer stepped into the elevator and looked directly at Colonel Harper. The alien's eyes were large and yellow with vertical pupils. His head tilted slightly as if something seemed wrong, but he couldn't identify what. Harper met the alien's gaze without flinching and projected an attitude of bored authority. Middle management annoyed at being interrupted. The security officer looked away first. The doors closed. The elevator continued up. Harper allowed himself one slow breath. That had been close. They reached the command level and exited into a wide corridor lined with security checkpoints. This was the hard part. Amy Foster stepped forward and spoke in flawless Corvian with an aristocratic accent that she had practiced for weeks. She informed the guard commander that they were inspectors from the Imperial Engineering Corps, sent to evaluate the command center's technical infrastructure. She produced forged credentials and maintenance orders with official seals that Paul Dixon had created. The guard commander examined the documents with obvious suspicion. He asked questions. Amy answered them with irritation in her voice. How dare a mere security officer question Imperial inspectors? Did he want to explain to his superiors why he delayed an official evaluation? The guards looked at each other uncertainly. Nobody wanted to be the person who obstructed Imperial business. Nobody wanted to be the person who let unauthorized personnel into the command center either. It was a perfect bureaucratic trap. The guard commander made his decision. He allowed them through. The third test passed. They were inside. The command center was a circular room 3 stories tall with holographic displays covering every surface. Corvian officers worked at stations arranged in concentric rings around a central platform. Data flowed across the displays in streams of light and color. Ship positions, fleet status reports, communications traffic, strategic planning files. Everything the Corvian military knew was right here in this room. Colonel Harper's team split up. Lisa Kane and Amy Foster moved toward the outer ring where technical stations had less security oversight. Paul Dixon approached a data access terminal under the pretense of checking system diagnostics. Ryan Cole and Kevin Brooks positioned themselves near the exits to watch for trouble. Harper stayed mobile and supervised everything while trying to look like he belonged. Paul Dixon connected a small device to the data terminal and began copying files. The device was another piece of human innovation. It didn't hack systems. It simply read data that was already being transmitted and stored copies without leaving any trace of access, invisible, untraceable, perfect for stealing information from right under enemy noses. The first files came through. Fleet positions. Paul's heart sank as he read the data. This wasn't an attack on the Outer Reach colonies. This was something much worse. The Corvians were targeting Earth directly. Not a raid, not a limited strike. A full invasion. 27 battle fleets, each one carrying enough firepower to devastate a planet. The attack was scheduled for 18 days from now. He signaled Colonel Harper with a subtle hand gesture. Harper moved closer and read the data on Paul's portable display. His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened slightly. This changed everything. They needed to get this intelligence back to Earth immediately. The regular military needed time to prepare defenses, time to mobilize, time to position forces for the fight of humanity's existence. But getting the message out from deep inside Corvian space was going to be a problem. Their communication equipment couldn't transmit through this much interference without boosting the signal. Boosting meant the Corvians would detect it instantly. They would lock down the station before the team could reach their ship. They would capture everyone. The intelligence would die with them. Harper looked at Paul Dixon and saw the same calculation happening behind his eyes. Someone had to stay behind. Someone had to create enough of a distraction to mask the transmission and give the others time to escape. It was simple math. Terrible math. But simple. One life to save millions. That was the kind. Paul Dixon moved through the station corridors alone and felt the weight of what he was about to do settle into his bones. The rest of the team was heading back toward the docking bay. He was heading down to the reactor levels where the station's power systems hummed with enough energy to light up a small moon, down to where he would end everything. He had already uploaded the stolen intelligence to his portable transmitter. 27 battle fleets, attack vectors, timing, command structure, everything Earth needed to prepare their defenses. The data sat encrypted in his equipment, waiting for the moment when he could burst transmit it through the electromagnetic interference. That moment would come soon. Very soon. The reactor control room was surprisingly empty. Just 2 Corvian technicians monitoring systems that mostly ran themselves. Dixon walked in with confidence and announced in perfect Corvian that he was there for a scheduled safety inspection. The technicians looked annoyed but not suspicious. Nobody liked inspectors. Nobody questioned them either. They pointed him toward the diagnostic terminals and went back to their own work. Dixon accessed the reactor control systems and began making subtle changes. He routed power through secondary conduits that weren't designed to handle that much energy. He disabled safety protocols that would normally shut down the reactor if temperatures climbed too high. He created a cascade failure that would build slowly at first and then accelerate beyond any ability to stop it. The reactor would go critical in approximately 15 minutes. The explosion would destroy the entire command station and everything within 100,000 kilometers. He set up his transmitter and connected it to the station's communication array. When the reactor went critical, the electromagnetic pulse would be massive. It would fry every unshielded system in range. It would also create a window of chaos where his transmission could slip through undetected. 90 seconds. That's all he needed. 90 seconds to send the most important intelligence data in human history back to Earth. The rest of Ghost Unit 7 reached the cargo elevator and descended toward the docking bay. Colonel Harper counted seconds in his head. They had maybe 12 minutes before Dixon triggered the cascade. 12 minutes to cross the station and reach their ship. 12 minutes before alarms started screaming and blast doors slammed shut. It would be close. Everything was always close on missions like this. Lisa Kane walked point with her hand near her concealed weapon. She watched every corner and every face they passed, looking for the moment when someone realized something was wrong. Looking for the instant when their cover story fell apart. It hadn't happened yet. The Corvians still saw maintenance workers and inspectors. They didn't see enemy operators who had just stolen their most classified military secrets. The elevator doors opened on the docking level. Amy Foster led them out and turned left toward the maintenance bay. 50 meters. That's all the distance between them and their ship. 50 meters that felt like 50 kilometers. Every step took too long. Every second stretched like hours. But they kept moving. Kept walking at a normal pace that didn't attract attention. Special Forces training covered this. How to move like you belong. How to project calm when your heart is racing. How to be invisible while everyone is watching. Paul Dixon checked his timer. 10 minutes until reactor failure. The Corvian technicians had finally noticed something wrong with their systems. Warning indicators flashed across their displays. Temperature readings climbed past safe levels. One technician reached for the emergency shutdown controls. Dixon drew his sidearm and shot both aliens before they could react. The suppressed weapon made almost no sound. The bodies fell. The reactor continued its death spiral toward critical mass. He sealed the control room door and welded it shut with a plasma torch from the maintenance kit. Nobody would get in. Nobody would stop the cascade now. He activated his transmitter and watched the progress bar begin its countdown. 90 seconds until transmission complete. 8 minutes until the reactor exploded. He had time. Barely. But enough. The team reached the maintenance bay and found it exactly as they left it. Empty. Quiet. Their stealth ship waited 30 meters away across the open deck. Kevin Brooks moved ahead to start the pre-flight sequence. Ryan Cole covered their rear. Lisa Kane and Amy Foster swept the bay for threats. Harper kept everyone moving. No time to relax. No time to celebrate. They weren't safe until they cleared Corvian space. Then the alarms started. Not the reactor alarms, security alarms. Someone had found the dead technicians. Someone had discovered the sealed control room. Someone had put together what was happening and sounded the alert. The entire station went into lockdown mode. Blast doors dropped across every corridor. Defense systems activated. Security teams mobilized. The Corvians knew they had intruders, but they didn't know where yet. Harper made the decision instantly. They couldn't wait. They had to run. He signaled Brooks to get the ship ready for immediate departure. He told everyone else to sprint. Stealth was over. Speed was everything now. They ran across the docking bay as security doors began closing. They were 20 meters from the ship when Corvian soldiers poured into the bay from 3 different entrances. Lisa Kane dropped to one knee and fired 6 shots in 4 seconds. 6 soldiers fell. Her accuracy was perfect even at a full sprint. But more aliens kept coming. Dozens of them. The team couldn't fight that many. They had to reach the ship. Ryan Cole laid down covering fire from the ship's rear hatch. His weapon barked in rapid bursts that forced the Corvians to seek cover. Amy Foster threw a flash grenade that bought them 3 more seconds. Harper pulled Lisa to her feet and shoved her toward the ship. Everyone was aboard except him. He fired one last burst to keep enemy heads down and then dove through the hatch as Kevin Brooks ignited the engines. The stealth ship lifted off with Corvian fighters scrambling to intercept. Brooks didn't follow normal departure procedures. He dropped the ship through the station's lower docking bay and dove toward the gas giant below. 3 fighters followed. The rest were still launching or didn't see which way the ship went. Brooks used the planet's gravity well to slingshot around the equator, and then burned hard for open space. The pursuing fighters matched his maneuver. This was going to be a running battle all the way out of Corvian territory. Paul Dixon watched his transmission progress bar reach 75%. 45 more seconds. The reactor temperature gauges showed red across every display. 5 minutes until critical failure. He could hear Corvian soldiers trying to breach the control room door. They were cutting through with industrial lasers. They would get in, eventually. Not in time to stop anything. But they would get in. He thought about his team escaping. Thought about the intelligence data reaching Earth. Thought about the lives that would be saved because of what they discovered here. It was enough. More than enough. This was what Special Forces did. They went into impossible situations and made impossible choices. Sometimes those choices meant not coming home. Sometimes that was the only way to complete the mission. The transmission reached 90%. The reactor hit critical temperature. The cascade was irreversible now. Even if someone shut down every system in the station, the reaction would continue until the reactor core breached and exploded. Physics didn't care about security protocols or emergency procedures. The math was simple and absolute. Too much energy in too small a space equals catastrophic failure. 100%. Transmission complete. Paul Dixon allowed himself a small smile. Earth had the intelligence. His team was escaping. The mission was accomplished. He had done his job. He had paid the price that needed paying. That was enough. That had to be enough. The Corvian soldiers breached the door. They poured into the control room with weapons raised. They saw Dixon standing calmly by the reactor controls. They saw the timer counting down. They understood in that instant what was about to happen. Some of them tried to run. Some of them tried to stop the cascade. None of them had time. The reactor went critical. The explosion turned the entire command station into a brief new sun. The electromagnetic pulse radiated outward and fried every electronic system within 100,000 kilometers. Corvian ships tumbled dead in space. Communication networks went dark. The offensive that had been so carefully planned fell into chaos as fleet commanders lost contact with their command structure. Kevin Brooks felt the pulse wash over their ship and held his breath. Their systems flickered. Emergency backups kicked in. The engines stuttered but kept running. They were far enough away. Barely, but far enough. He pushed the ship harder toward the nebula edge and the safety of open space beyond. Behind them, the station died in fire and radiation. With it died Paul Dixon, technical sergeant, demolitions expert, electronic warfare specialist, a man who walked into certain death so that others could live, a special forces operator who understood that sometimes one life buys thousands. Sometimes that's the only equation that matters. The team flew in silence. Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say. They had lost one of their own. They had completed the mission. Both things were true. Both things hurt. That was the reality of Special Forces operations. You did impossible things. You paid impossible prices. You carried the weight of both for the rest of your life. Colo. 3 weeks after Ghost Unit 7 returned to Earth, the Corvian offensive arrived at the Centauri system and found humanity waiting. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his command ship and watched 27 enemy battle fleets emerge from faster-than-light travel. The aliens had brought everything. Enough firepower to reduce planets to rubble, enough soldiers to occupy a dozen worlds. They came expecting surprise. They came expecting easy victory. They found neither. Earth's defensive fleet was positioned perfectly. Destroyers held the high ground near the system's asteroid belt. Cruisers guarded the approach lanes to the colonies. Battleships formed a wall between the Corvians and the inner planets. Fighter squadrons launched from 3 different carriers and spread out to cover the flanks. The humans had turned the entire system into a killing field, and the aliens had jumped right into the middle of it. Morrison gave the order to engage. His Marines were already loaded into dropships and ready for boarding actions. They had studied the intelligence that Ghost Unit 7 had stolen. They knew which ships were command vessels. They knew which fleets were veterans and which were newly formed. They knew the Corvian battle plans better than some of the Corvian admirals did. Knowledge was advantage. Advantage was survival. Lieutenant Nicole Brady commanded her destroyer squadron from the bridge of the ship bearing her name. The Brady and her sister ships accelerated toward the nearest Corvian fleet with weapons hot and shields at maximum. She had fought these aliens before at Titan. She knew they were dangerous. She knew they were well-trained. She also knew they had never faced humans who were ready and waiting. That was about to make all the difference. The battle began with missile exchanges at long range. Thousands of warheads crossed the void between fleets. Point defense systems lit up space with interceptor fire. Some missiles got through. Ships on both sides took damage. Shields flickered and failed. Armor plating vaporized under direct hits. This was modern space warfare, brutal, efficient, absolutely merciless. But the humans had the advantage. They knew where the Corvians would be. They knew how the aliens would approach. They had mined the asteroids with automated weapons platforms. They had positioned their heaviest ships where they would do the most damage. The Corvian surprise attack had become a prepared ambush. The hunters had become the hunted. Morrison's Marines boarded a Corvian battleship using breaching pods that punched through the hull like bullets through paper. They fought room by room through corridors filled with enemy soldiers. It was close-quarters combat at its most savage. No space for tactics, no time for strategy. Just violence delivered with absolute commitment. The Marines pushed forward. The Corvians pushed back. Bodies fell on both sides. But the humans kept coming. They always kept coming. Brady's squadron focused fire on a Corvian carrier and hammered it with everything they had. Railguns, missile batteries, energy weapons. The carrier's shields collapsed under the assault. The hull breached in a dozen places. Secondary explosions rippled through the ship's interior. It began to drift dead in space. Its fighters scattered without coordination. One target eliminated, 26 fleets remaining. The battle continued for 6 days. Not continuous fighting. Even warships need time to recharge weapons and repair damage. But 6 days of engagement and disengagement. 6 days of hunting and being hunted. 6 days of space turning red with debris and bodies. Both sides lost ships. Both sides lost people. But the humans held the line. They gave no ground. They defended every colony and every planet with everything they had. On the 6th day, the Corvian commanders made their decision. They withdrew. Their surprise attack had failed. Their superior numbers hadn't been enough. The humans had known they were coming and prepared accordingly. Continuing the battle would result in fleet annihilation with nothing gained. Better to retreat and regroup. Better to survive and learn from this disaster. Commander Vexral survived the battle aboard the Eternal Dawn. His ship was damaged, but operational. He had lost a third of his crew and most of his escort vessels. He had also lost something more important: his confidence, his certainty, his belief that the Corvian Empire understood humanity's military capabilities. That belief was shattered like his ship's armor plating. He requested access to every piece of intelligence the Coalition had gathered on human military forces. He spent weeks reviewing battle reports and survivor testimonies. He interviewed officers who had fought against Earth forces in previous engagements. He looked for patterns. He looked for explanations. He looked for the answer to one question. How did the humans know? The Corvian offensive planning had been perfect. Complete operational security, no leaks, no intercepted communications. No possible way for Earth to discover their plans. Yet somehow the humans had known everything. Fleet positions, attack timing, strategic objectives. They had known it all and prepared accordingly. Someone had penetrated Corvian security. Someone had stolen their most classified military secrets. Someone who left no trace. Vexral began finding the gaps again. Those same impossible missions that had bothered him before the offensive. A weapons facility destroyed with no record of the attacking force. An intelligence center compromised with no evidence of breach. An admiral assassinated aboard his own flagship. And now this. A command station destroyed. Strategic planning files stolen. An entire offensive compromised by an enemy that seemed to operate like ghosts. He interviewed survivors from the command station. Very few had escaped before the reactor explosion. Those who did told strange stories. A small team of humans. Maybe 6 individuals. They had infiltrated the most secure facility in Corvian space. They had accessed classified military computers. They had destroyed the entire station to cover their escape. It was impossible, except it had happened. The wreckage floating in space proved it had happened. Vexral compiled his findings into a report. He presented it to the Coalition Council. The galaxy's military leadership gathered to hear what he had discovered. He explained about the gaps in their intelligence. He described the pattern of impossible operations. He told them about the small teams that appeared and disappeared like smoke. He showed them the truth they had been ignoring. Earth's conventional military was formidable. Everyone knew that. The Coalition had studied human armies and navies for 15 years. They had adapted their tactics accordingly. They had learned to respect human soldiers and fear human determination. But there was something else. Something the aliens had missed. Something humanity had kept hidden. Elite forces that operated beyond normal military structure. Small teams with capabilities exceeding entire battalions. Soldiers who specialized in impossible missions. Operators who functioned in the shadows and struck without warning. The humans had a name for them. Special Forces. The Coalition had no equivalent. They had no concept. They had no defense. The Council reviewed Vexral's report in silence. The implications were staggering. If humans had forces that could penetrate the most secure facilities in the galaxy, then nowhere was safe. No plan was secure. No secret was protected. Earth's special forces could strike anywhere at any time, and the Coalition would never see them coming. One council member asked how many of these special forces soldiers Earth possessed. Vexrel couldn't answer. The intelligence files contained no information. No numbers. No unit designations. No organizational structure. The humans kept this capability completely hidden. For all the Coalition knew, Earth might have dozens of these teams, hundreds, thousands. There was no way to tell. Another council member asked how the Coalition should respond. Vexrel had thought about this question for weeks. His answer was simple and terrifying. Avoid conflict with Earth entirely if possible. The risk was too great. The uncertainty was too dangerous. Every military operation against humanity would now have to account for forces that might not exist, or might be everywhere. It was a strategic nightmare. The Coalition updated their intelligence files on Earth. A new section appeared in every report marked with the highest security classification. Earth maintains elite military units beyond conventional force structure. Capabilities unknown, numbers unknown, operational methods unknown. Threat assessment impossible with current intelligence. Recommend extreme caution. Recommend avoiding direct conflict. Colonel Dan Harper received a commendation for Ghost Unit 7's actions. The ceremony took place in a bunker deep underground with fewer than 20 people present. No media, no publicity, no public recognition. Special Forces operations stayed classified. The people who did impossible things remained unknown. That was how it had to be. Harper accepted the medal on behalf of his team, especially on behalf of Paul Dixon, who had paid the ultimate price. The sacrifice would never be public. Dixon's family had been told he died in a training accident. His real achievements would remain classified for decades, maybe forever. That was the price of operating in the shadows. You saved the world and nobody ever knew. Ghost Unit 7 returned to their facility in the Colorado mountains. There would be more missions. There were always more missions. More threats to counter, more impossible objectives to accomplish, more enemies who needed to learn that humanity was more dangerous than they imagined. This was what Special Forces did. They operated where our